just want to welcome you to the first session of Chain Reactions, our new AGR sort of podcast webinar series about the spark behind smarter supply chain decisions. And today's topic is data, the first link in the chain, because it's hard to decide if you don't know what you're deciding on. And what we're going to focus on today is not only the data you need, of course that's going to be sort of the first step, but we also are going to talk about where you need it. We're going to problematize and break down this idea of a single source of truth, that everybody loves talking about. And especially we're going to focus on why data is so important so that you can make solid forecasts, make solid plans that you can share with your vendors or customers, whatever is appropriate for your business, and you can meet your KPIs. Because it's hard to know if your business is on track if you don't know what it means to be on track and if the data isn't telling you whether or not you're on track. My name is Randi Stebbins, and I am the head of content here at AGR. But I'm also a long-time facilitator, mediator, and moderator, so that's why I'm sitting in the moderator's chair today. With me today are two supply chain experts that in total have almost 40 years experience in different supply chain roles. So I'm very excited that they are here to share both their breadth and their depth of knowledge with you. Right next to me is Elva, who's one of the internal AGR supply chain experts. And then there's Hanna Maria, who is a logistics manager for Advania here in Iceland. That's all I'm going to say about them because they know themselves much better than I do. But I do want them to give you a little more insight into their own experiences. So Elva, could you tell me a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, of course. So I did my master in supply chain, and I've been working here as a consultant at AGR for years. Before that, I worked as a global category manager and procurement manager at a production company. And I did get some nice master data experience as a master data steward during a Dynamics Accepted to SAP migration that went on for 3 years.
Wow.
So that was fun, we can say.
Yeah. Yeah, for those of you who are maybe migrating ERPs, that sounds scary, but I think this is a specific, quite complicated setup that you were working with.
Yeah, you could say that SAP is very data bureaucracy heavy, and then you have to understand how SAP wants their data. So Dynamics Accept might have nice master data maturity, if you will, but was the data ready for SAP? So that was the task.
Yeah, nice. So that's like deep knowledge into how to get the data ready for any sort of transfer to a new system.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is really important, and hopefully we'll draw that out during our discussion. And Hanna Maria, can you tell the viewers more about yourself?
Yeah, well, I've been in supply chain management for many years, in production first, then retail, and now B2B. I was involved in implementing ATR in a local retailer here in Iceland a few years ago. We had 7 department stores. With 60,000 SKUs and very short lead times and high inventory turnover. Now I'm a purchasing manager in Advania in Iceland, where we have like fewer SKUs but longer lead times and a slower turnover. So it's a broad spectrum of using AGR in different scenarios.
Nice. So, I think when we were putting this panel together, one reason we wanted you to join us is that you all have so much experience in such a diversity of supply chains, of industry types and stuff like that, which hopefully will speak to our viewer because it can be hard to know, what is appropriate for your business type, but what isn't. But before we dive into that, let's frighten our viewers a little bit. I know you both have horror stories from what the cost is of not having a good overview of your data in a centralized place. Like, what is the cost, Elva, in your opinion, to not having good data?
Well, if your data is not in order, it's holding you back. You're just stuck in manual work, and it's limiting. You can't really gain efficiencies. I, for example, had 3 production plants where I was like strategically responsible for negotiating with suppliers, trying to rationalize, trying to find synergies. And one production site, they didn't even have the original item numbers. So when extracting who you buy from and then what do we buy from them, I couldn't see if the plant in Aarhus was also buying what they were doing in another plant in Denmark. So I had to like start with the data to get to the level where you can actually go strategic and make some smart decisions. And then sometimes they were firefighting and you had to get from alternative vendors, and then if the prices weren't updated, then it might, the shipment could be stuck in customs because the purchase order didn't match the invoice, and there was an email that perhaps wasn't addressed at the same day and people were waiting. So it's like, if things are going to run smoothly, you have to have certain data up to date in the systems, or a lot of headcounts to cover for it.
Yeah, so it sounds like, you're losing out on the chance to negotiate better prices. You've got possibly goods stuck in customs somewhere when you're expecting them.
When you have a stock out and the production line is stopped and the customer is waiting, and it's like...
Yeah. So those are like really difficult business issues to need to overcome and firefight, as you said. What about you, Hanna? Oh, and Hanna, we got a message that'd be nice if you could speak up just a little bit. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, with good data, it's easier to like automate and stop all the manual input and streamline the processes. Cost of doing nothing is like just messy data, too much, like too many item numbers that are not giving you any value, and it can feel like overwhelming when you have too much data. You don't know where to start. So
it can be complicated. I remember once one of the stores had to buy something urgently, and they got like a pallet during it was a bank holiday coming up, and the store manager, they didn't book the invoice at the same day. So the system didn't know it was there, and you just kept getting more of the soda that was already like a full pallet load of. So that's also quite like important that you book it on time, not just the master data, but the process of saying data is in the system.
So you went from like stock out to way overstock very quickly because information wasn't flowing. And the data wasn't there. So given that there are definite business costs to not have data in the right place, not have information flowing, why do you think that companies and teams are reluctant to get data cleaned up and put somewhere where people can get the most of it, not have to firefight, maybe not be stuck in these manual processes for so long?
Well, I'll say people are busy. They're busy all the time, and they really have to see the guiding light, like where to start. And if that's clear, then it's not that big of a task. But you need the compass. And you need to sort of, define, where to start. And once, like, it could be a project, and then it's sort of daunting because it's so much. But then you also want to say, if you want to get your house in order, what's wrong with the house? What processes aren't we sort of addressing? So if, like, for example, getting SAP data or Dynamics accepted data ready for SAP, and it's like 6 months before the migration, the consultants would say, you need to clean this, but then you're going to be creating items up until then. So find a way to make sure you get the data sustainably in the item creation process, so you're not going to be cleaning and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Elva. So you may have to actually change your process first before you go in and change
There's a
the
reason
data.
for the pile.
Yeah, because you don't want to go through that cleaning project and then have new data come in that's not useful. Hanna, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you need to define what's important to you and make rules and how you want to work with it, and then do the spring cleaning, of the data. So yeah, you can sustain it.
It's very important to sustain it.
Yeah.
Because once you know what you need, then you can sort of say how it should look then in the process. And it might just be 2 data fields that you just don't add when you create the items. It's not necessarily that much. But when there's thousands of items, and then you have to sort of, it can be daunting.
So, Hanna, you brought up something that we've talked about before, which is you have to look at your business and decide what data is important for you. So, based on your experience managing the retail stores, what sort of data was important for you to start with and to look at in order to get a handle on what was going on?
The basic fields, of course, just the item numbers and lead time, original vendor item numbers. But the assortment was most important to us. So what should be in, well, we had 7 locations and we didn't have the same assortment in every store. So we had like big stores that carried all the departments like grocery, clothes, toys and everything. Then we had the smaller stores that only carried groceries. So we had, when we implemented ATR, we got all the data and we saw that in the smaller stores we had shoes, for example. So we were asking like, why do we have shoes in the assortment in this store? We don't carry shoes. And the answer was like, well, everybody knows we don't carry shoes in the smaller stores, but the system didn't know. So the system couldn't help us because it didn't have all the information.
Yeah. So up until AGR, it wasn't a problem that the assortment was just everything everywhere because people knew. But then once you get a system that can automate, then data really matters. Yeah. Because otherwise, either you're manually reviewing every order line and saying not this, not this, not this, and then it really becomes fruits like to get the data in order. It's a really big payoff.
And you need to see that you have to put in the work to do things once, but then you can automate in the future. But you have to see that in the long run it pays off.
So I want to take a look at this thought that everyone knows, or one person knows, right? Because when everybody knows, often it's just one person who knows. And I had a recent interview with a client of AGR's, and they were explaining to us how they had a good spreadsheet set up, but only one person really understood it. And as happens in life, that one person went on to another job. And so that institutional knowledge was lost. And I think this happens quite often, what we think we know versus what the institution or the company knows. So for you, Elva, in your experience, what is the problem with this idea of everybody just knows?
Yeah, because I think that's the truth for a lot of companies. You have dedicated workforce that really passionately cares for the business, and they, get to know the business, they learn from it, and they have this process where it really works. And I came into such a business where I was just like, you just figure it out, you just find it out. And I did, and then I was like, that was so much work. Whoever will then come after me when I get promoted or a different job, I want the sort of foundation what I have built to be there, accessible and in place. And it can be tricky because the ERPs only hold so and so much data. So it's really about having a process defined and having workshops with your team and say, what is the best practice here? How do we work together? And then, store that somewhere.
Yeah, and I think, there's this concept in business or just in life of institutional memory. And of course, memory only resides in human beings. But it is this question of understanding that you're just a steward of this data for a certain amount of time, or you're of this company, no matter how much you love it and really want to work for it. And that is definitely your experience, Hanna, because you moved out of that retail and into a B2B company. And when you started Advania, what kind of institutional memory as far as data with supply chain did you inherit? Was there any available to you, or did you have to start over from zero?
There was some, but yeah, I needed to do a lot of work and like figure things out that weren't in the system.
And everybody has their own nose. Yeah. So you are very mature in what data sort of serves a purpose in procurement and inventory management. So even though there's everything there, I think everybody will always go in with their own sort of I need to do my own analysis. But then it's really nice if somebody has gone ahead and said, definitely for the day-to-day operations. Because my very first job, I was for 1 year sort of scouting between departments when everybody had vacations, and there was on the internal website every process was documented. So I didn't even have to ask anyone about anything. So it is possible.
It is possible.
I just click the right links. Do this, check.
Yeah. And I think the documentation that goes along with this sort of data thing is so important. It's almost as important, because if you, like we said before, you do the process but you're still inputting data that's not helpful, then it just gets worse and worse and worse and snowballs as time goes on. So now that we've talked about like blockers, we've talked about why it's important, what does good data look like in your opinion? And especially from the point of view of different industries, different types of companies may have different ideas about what good data is. And I really think that's important to just say again, like we act like there's some sort of unified understanding of what good data is, but it really depends on your business, your goals, what you see is important for your work. Nonetheless, what does it look like? Like, Elva, you want to start that one?
Well, I think if the assortment is clear, that is a really clean and nice house. And, new items, things that you have to manage, if they're easily, you can surface new items so that you can really manage them as they start to kick off, and you can adjust if they, start to fly or if they're not really picking up. And to keep the house clean and the stock and the inventory, to have a process for those dead items, items that should be closed, that are even delisted, but you still have stock, to just clean it out, make sure you have room to get those incoming goods that are actually in demand.
What about you, Hanna?
Yeah, I agree. The assortment, and also if you have like special order items, mark that, and mark what you want to keep in stock.
So regular stock versus special order items. Make sure you mark them. So it's clear, like these should always be here, but then we do not want to have those special order items. But for some reason, you have to have them in assortment, and you have those cases in Advania.
Yeah, we use that a lot. So if there comes a sales order that it is processed, then we know we need to buy it. If it's marked special order.
But some companies have special order items. And then they have open sales orders that they can't really buy according to, because it might be a quote to a customer, and the sales team isn't then cleaning that, so it's fake demand and you can't rely on it. And then when they're buying, they'll be like messaging each other like, should I buy this? Yes or no? And that is sort of stopping you from just trusting the data, being efficient.
Doing it automatically.
So it's like, be kind to your, because there are, departments, they're internal customers, and we should really like help each other to gain efficiency as a whole.
So it sounds like one of the first step is just clean it up. Close the things that need to be closed, such as the open orders that are not going to be fulfilled.
Just like as a day-to-day thing to do.
Also, maybe the items
Mhm.
that are no longer in stock and you don't plan on restocking that
Yeah.
have gone out of stock.
Mhm.
Though we were talking that in like the spare parts business, which some of our customers are as far as automotive parts, they may not be closing items necessarily because they need to keep, they have
Mhm.
different
Yeah, it's so
needs.
hard with spare parts.
Yeah.
Because like in production, coming in looking for items to close was like not the low-hanging fruit to gain.
Mhm.
Because we had R&D and we had project-driven productions, so it was not the same staples again and again. It was, the customer might buy this again or that again, and then R&D might, use this design. So we were looking for like you will have nuts and bolts from different vendors, and that's good to dual source, risk mitigate. But then the complexity might be more than the healthy mix, and then you look for consolidation opportunities. But the data for production, in my experience, was just like the lead times, they really serve a purpose. You really have to have like it takes 2 weeks or it does take 5 weeks so that you can sort of trust the data. And quality. So every time we have alternative items, we're not switching who we buy it from on the item. We create new items because it's this original item number that went into this machine. And if that fails out in the field, we have to send a repair guy to Germany, that is so expensive. So we need to know that that sensor is problem from this supplier or the other supplier, and then we're gonna cut them off. So traceability can be very important. And then you have, as a producer and for cars and spare parts, after somebody stops producing a car, you have to service it. So we had like end of life announcements on machines, and then we had like plus 7 or 10 years we promised to service.
Yeah.
And that is complexity. How much to hold of spare parts for so and so many machines out there, and how often do they break?
Yeah, but I think it's a really good point, right? For a certain type of business, good data looks like this. For a certain type of business, it looks like something else. If retail, wholesale, you're looking at the assortment most of the time, what's selling, what's not, what's open, what's closed. Let's make sure that the data in the system matches the reality of it.
Fast-moving consumer goods, always something new. You have to close it very fast or it becomes a monster.
Yeah. So now that we've got a concept of maybe for different types of industries what good data looks like, what are some best practices or thoughts you have on how to store that data and where to store it? We talked about institutional memory. In your experiences, what's worked, what hasn't worked?
I think you should store the data where the data has a value. Some companies want every single piece of data to be in the ERP in the or a data warehouse. I think it's really up to each business what's practical. The effort of maintaining it versus the value it brings.
Yeah, I agree. Have as much as you can in one place, but if it doesn't serve a purpose in the ERP system, don't bother storing it there. And if it takes a lot of work to put it in there, but it's easier to put it in somewhere else, do that.
Yeah, you had the example of minimum stock and shelves, and it took a lot of time to do it in the ERP, like clickety click 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 click. But then in the system that it served the purpose, where it actually enabled a process automation.
Yeah.
It was quite fast and easy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So job done.
To put it in and maintain it.
But then you can get IT to upload it later. If it's important, right?
Yeah.
So that system was AGR when you were, I think that's really interesting insight because I feel like when somebody is working in an ERP, there are so many, or any sort of database system, there are so many possible fields to fill in that it can seem like, oh my gosh, if I fill in every tiny little field for every item, I'm never gonna do it. So I would like your insight on like how to decide, and I know we've talked about this a little bit, how to decide like what you can ignore and what you really need to have someplace. What sort of decision-making process or key decision points, help that decision.
Yeah. I think for, when we started to measure lead times and supply reliability, we had Power BI. So we had the system lead time, and then we had the actual. And then we had what's the buffer? So we said +2 days because it could be out in the parking lot before you take it in, handling time. And then we would grade the suppliers. And then that also helped to just for the negotiation to you said it was 4 weeks, but we can see it is sometimes 3 weeks, sometimes 5 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't help to get it early. We want it on time. So just by measuring it, it's something you can then manage. And then you can also trace if it's going well or how it's going.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say it doesn't help to get it early, and I think this is so true when you're managing supply chain because you've got things down to the moment of where you have space, where it needs to be.
Yeah, it could be really expensive items also.
Yeah.
The ones that because we have 400 suppliers, you can't manage 400 suppliers. You find your key suppliers, and then you have your KPIs, and then you do the 80-20, don't you?
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on the 80-20, Hanna?
Yeah, for us, 80% of the products could just be run rate, something that could be automatically ordered. Well, 20% is something you want to look into, that has fluctuating demand and some new items and something you need to take care of.
And it's not, 80-20 value of the business. It's 80% is a really nice number to get into a process efficiency where you don't have to think about it. That's a really nice number. And then you're spending your time on the one-offs, on the new ones. This holiday season, the noise.
But I feel like getting to that 80% goal is only possible if you have the data and the processes in place to let it run, right?
Yeah.
Once you have that in place, then and honestly, then you get the insight of what are these 20% that may need more of your time, may need more of your effort, and you can kind of trust, that the 80% is just flowing along. Where I think if you're lacking the data, that insight, those processes, you're still spending time or maybe possibly too much time on those 80% and not enough time on that 20% that you really need to be focusing on. Does this fit with your experience?
Yes, and for us, we thought the 20% we needed to spend time on was the A-listed numbers.
Yeah, the A-ones.
Yeah, something that always needs to be there and stuff like that. Yeah. But then when we started looking at the data, we saw that these important products is something just selling regularly, and you don't have to pay attention to it.
And I've heard this from different industries.
Yeah.
Because the import, plumbing items and steel and heavy bulk, and he was telling me, I spend my time on the C items. When the sales team is just doing everything for a customer, and they say just get this thing, and I haven't bought it for 5 years, and the supplier doesn't have it anymore, and I start sourcing and negotiating prices on a box, and then I have to buy 10 in a box, and he wanted 1, and then we have too much stock, and it's. But that is assortment also. Be clear on what is optional, and if you close out those delisted items, the sales can't sell it, maybe.
One would think, but that also takes a good amount of communication.
Yeah,
and I can understand, if something is said, okay, this is an AA item, this is, then of course you're going to feel like you need to. Yeah. But it is ideal that you don't have to worry about those items, and you know that your customers are going to have them in stock, and they are where they need to be when they need it. That, of course, takes a little bit of time and trust when you switch over to a new system. And I know that we've at AGR, when we have new customers join us, and Hanna, your experiences as well, and Elva, yours as a consultant, is it does take some time to trust a new system, be it going from spreadsheets to an ERP, going from an ERP to an inventory or supply chain management software like AGR's. Can you give our viewers a little bit more insight about how to build up that trust so they can let go of that feeling of I need to spend all my time on these A items?
I think with AGR, because it's a system like on the side, you're not replacing anything just like that. You can implement it and just do it manually or like you did before and compare it with what AGR is suggesting. So I think that's a good place to start. Just have people do it manually like they did it before and compare it with what AGR is suggesting, and then you can see the difference and like dive into why is there a difference? Is it because you did the calculation wrong, or does AGR not have all the information?
Yeah, that was also true with the SAP migration. You run it parallel. You have the world and then there's this new system. And to trust the new system, you sort of have to have the world on the side.
Yeah.
And then you can see if there's deviations. And then why are there deviations? And often with a forecast, it's different calculations. And then you want to understand the calculations and then see the data behind between different SKUs. And once you get that trust after running it for a few weeks, then you can understand because there's a gap in the sale history, or it's a new item that actually was selling 12 months ago, it stopped and then it went again. So there are different reasons for something to be skewed in a calculation. But to get that kind of trust is very important.
Yeah, because we don't ever want to say that what people know in their heads is wrong.
No.
Obviously,
No.
both of you are here, like you have deep knowledge in this. And it is really important to respect that knowledge and then see if any system you take on, whatever it might be, or any changes you make, actually are in line with that, or I think this is really important, Elva, give you new insights, right?
Yeah.
Because often we have customers at AGR who are like, well, my ERP did this forecast, but you're doing this forecast. What's going on, right? And maybe, Elva, you can speak a little bit to the what's going on. Why might there be a little bit of a difference between the two systems?
Well, often there's a 3-month moving average, and that means you're looking at 3 months sales average. And then understanding that actually in AGR we have a forecasting module that will have different forecast methods to apply to a vast sale history up to 2 or 3 years, depending on what fits the business. And then it's going to automatically select between different models. It's going to apply the forecast, run like which is the least forecasting error, and automatically select the best fitting forecast. It's going to take trends, it's going to take seasonality. You might end up with a moving average if you have few data points, but it's not an average of the sales. It is a forecast on its own.
So it's not that a new system, whatever it may be, is not to be trusted. It's just there may be new data coming in, there may be some data missing that needs to be updated. It's really about staying curious and wondering. And I think about this lovely anecdote that a customer shared with us that like in their old system, they wasn't catching seasonality early enough. So they would buy for the holiday season a little too late. And then a month later, they would still have all these holiday items in their warehouse. And this is, in this case, a wholesaler. And they would need to like mark them down in order to make room and stuff like that. And once they started getting a more solid forecast and they enriched the forecast data so that it was really running, then they could clearly see the seasonality. It was visual in front of them. And they could order in a more timely manner and not have that problem, right? And this is something that they knew that it was an issue, but they weren't exactly sure why it was an issue until they were able to really dig into what was going on and why it's happening.
Often it's just clutter. It's just, a lot going on. They have too much stock. They don't know which one. And that was exactly the case. You're going into high season and you're looking at 3 months average sales off the low season. Then you sort of miss out in the beginning. And then coming out of high season, you're not ramping down. You're looking at 3 months average high season. And you have experience after taking AGR of Christmas product finally not being in the store in January.
Yeah.
Because the system knew it was a Christmas item.
Yeah. Seasonality. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I know the store that Hanna worked at, and I go in there, and I did notice, just a little insider knowledge, that when you adopted a more advanced forecasting system, the holiday items came in a little bit sooner, and once the holiday was over, they were gone, and it just was like a very different reality. But we've been talking about, we need the data, but we need to understand what the data is telling us. And Hanna, you have a really interesting, I think, anecdote about how going from a spreadsheet to a more visual product that could help you visualize what the data was telling you was helpful. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I worked with other forecasting products that were not so visual like AGR is. So it's easier to see the data in AGR. You can drill down and just like the item cart and the grid, you can see more visual how it's how the seasonality behaves and everything. So you don't have to, you get a better understanding of the data with it so visual. You don't have to be an expert to see it.
It's more approachable.
Yeah. And it's easier, you can make quicker decisions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Instead of like pouring through a spreadsheet, which as an expert you're going to understand, but it takes time.
It takes more eye effort.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. There's like those cells and so many, it's really hard. And all these tabs. Because when we were prepping for this, we talked about how almost as important a discussion, and maybe one we'll have later, is not only do you have the data, do you have it available, but what are you taking from the data? Because we talked about how 5 people with 5 different backgrounds or experiences may look at the same data and come away with different stories, right? Which gets to this idea of a single source of the truth. Yeah. Which I posed this question to them and they're like, oh my gosh. And we came to an interesting answer. This is a buzzword that, of course, is tossed around all the time. And I am somebody who is inherently skeptical about any buzzword. Yeah. So I am always wondering, what in the world does a single source of truth mean?
When I saw that question from you, I was just like, what am I even going to write about it? Like, from what perspective and angle? And it's like, if it's a spreadsheet, then it's like, yeah, you can have a spreadsheet and Power BI reports, and then it's like, is everybody looking at the same spreadsheet? Okay, fine, but, you have your own analytics and your own outcomes. So are those, necessary because you have different category groups, and that might very well be. And then where I work, we did not have the luxury of, those accessible reports to be for the procurement team per se, but they had the ERP and they really viewed different information. So we had a workshop, and our most seasoned procurement, operational procurement person, he had like 5 different windows open within Dynamics Accepta. But then the new guys, they didn't. They just had, the purchase lines and the sale transactions and the stock count. And it was so because they sat at the production site floor to help, be with the day-to-day business. So we actually just decided to sit together as a team so that we could share tips and tricks. Also because we were migrating to SAP, and we had to have like a lot of meetings. And we did a workshop, and we just sort of felt like the information viewed by, the senior procurement guy, is that something you guys feel could help you? And everybody agreed. They just didn't know necessarily. Or they had seen it once and they didn't click. And then another sort of angle is central control versus decentral ordering, because the central department might have, the assortment is clear. We decided on it, we maintain it. But then if the store managers are responsible for buying it, for example, one furniture company said that before they had the central, ordering, one store manager, he just never ordered carpets. Ever. He didn't feel like it, I guess.
He just didn't like carpets.
So why would you have them? And it's about customer experience coming into the store. So that's not a single source of truth within the company. And then you have with before HR, the stores were replenished with barcodes, and then the barcode, disappeared and there was nothing to scan, and then all of a sudden,
it wasn't in the assortment. So
and then the system started to generate it, and they looked at the freezer and they're like, oh my god, we have so much variety.
And how did that look then? What, if we think about a single source of truth, how did that look for you, running a retail supply chain? And then in the current one, what was that like?
Well, I think the single source of truth is like I have to keep all the data or information in the same place from where everyone can look at it. Everyone knows where to look for it, both humans and machines. It can't be in someone's head. So it makes it a lot easier if you have it in one place, know where to look for it. And that was the case, like we were talking about, like ordering with the scanners. You didn't know, their store didn't know what they were supposed to have in the store because they didn't know where to look for it. But if you have it centralized and you can communicate it to everyone, then everyone knows.
And I just want to, because I know more of the story that you're talking about, Hanna, I just want to emphasize that it wasn't taking power away from people who were in charge of ordering into the stores. It was just giving them more tools so that they could better understand what their store's needs were and where they could get it from. Sometimes it feels like a power grab perhaps from a centralized source to be like, no.
But it helps. It really helps because you're so busy. And like for the furniture company, it was like a whole day for a store manager to really replenish the store. And then all of a sudden, it's saving time so they can make sure that the store looks good. And the central guy was actually ordering for all the stores in 2 or 3 hours after getting a system that can really automate that for you. But then also you have to have rules on what the single source of truth is if we think about the data that you're looking at. Because we try to do this with HR. We label this is overstock, this is risk of stockout. And then in the settings we have a page where people go in and they say this is how we define it. And then if you would like to define it in a different way, then go ahead, put in the parameters. And then every single SKU will get this bubble marking. This is risk of stockout. And then you can just surface a report, say, show me all the risk of stockout items. And then you have data that you can act on, and it's actionable. And that is empowerment. And that gives the store managers control over the central, like whoever needs the information. It just gives you more power to do a really good job.
And everyone's looking at the same data or same information.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because with spreadsheets or with a non-centralized database, sometimes you wonder, like, am I only working in a copy of my own? Am I working in the main one? And then if you're working in the main one and you think it's a copy and you alter something in the main one, there's
you send me the memo.
There's a little bit more chance of human error, right? Because we are just people, and it has its own limitations. But I just wanted to follow up on Hanna's story because I noticed as a customer of this store that after you implemented a more unified supply chain management tool like AGRs, I actually saw different behaviors in the store. Before, when I would go in and ask something, it was hard to find people because they were busy, scanning and trying to restock that way. And afterwards, they were there to actually service the customer, make sure that the shelves were stocked correctly, do, their job, and not only have time for one aspect of their job. And it made a really big difference. And I think, we talking about this before, an important takeaway that we all talked about is you don't know what the possibilities are, right? Because you get so used to doing it the way you're used to, and it's good enough. Or you feel like, okay, I can do it. But hopefully with the stories we're sharing, people realize, there is a different possibility. There's a different reality out there, and it may take a little bit of work, but it's really worth it. So with that, for companies that are juggling multiple sources of data, which, as we mentioned, may not be bad, we want data to be where it gives you the most value, right? but are looking towards building towards a single source of truth. And I love this idea about it. The single source of truth could be knowledge sharing. It could be in someone's head. Like, I really love that idea. Because again, we're not talking about taking away the human. We're just talking about like
making
it easier to be human.
People know it, and then just how can we make their life easier? So we can run faster as a company, because competition will adopt the technology. And sometimes you hear, if it's not broken, like, why fix it? But it's like, at some point it will be, and then it's going to be such a huge daunting task to catch up.
And sometimes, and we talked about this earlier too, sometimes you don't even know it's broken, right? Like, focusing your time on the A items. Like, that to you is a natural choice. And it's maybe not necessarily broken, but it's not the best use of your time. Well, how are you going to know that unless you get a reality check from somewhere else, from a unified system? But for those who are struggling to start this journey, what sort of advice can you give them to start building towards this single source of truth idea? Have I stumped you?
So just on multiple data sources, or?
Yeah, if they're working with multiple data sources, let's say they have some stuff in spreadsheets, some stuff in their ERP, other stuff.
When you don't, like, if you're relying on your ERP, you're gonna have multiple sources, because you're so limited with just the ERP. There's so limited information. And I know people have had like 4 different data sources on the screen, and then, a system that can help you optimize inventory is actually consolidating the information in one place. So you can just look at, one system, and it's not that big of a task, because the other systems, they don't need to go away. I mean, the spreadsheets will, but you sort of just get the new system, you test it, you validate it, you start to trust it, and then you're left with, okay, so what do I need then? And maybe you don't need the spreadsheets anymore, then. But you will always need the ERP. And probably a few others, point of sale systems.
Yeah, but that's an interesting thought, right? Because then we're talking about maybe your ERP, point of sales, inventory management, other systems, right? In that conceptualization of the world, the ERP is kind of like the single source of truth, because the others draw from it. And then you can, of course, adjust and add and enrich data within each of these companion programs or applications as well. What about you, Hanna Maria? What sort of advice? You've been through this process a couple times. What have you learned from it? And what would you tell your past self?
I think, like Elva said, if you have a system that can draw out from the other system, like AGR can do, and show you the information in one place, even though the data is coming from different sources.
Have as many data sources through an API feed, and then
that helps. And like, the ERP systems are not good at showing you these things, so when you get the AGR, you can more like drill down, and it helps.
And even you mentioned Power BI before, like, I think a lot of companies, of course, use Power BI for different reasons to track KPIs. But let's say that's an add-on to the ERP, which it is. I don't even have to say it is. Why is that maybe not enough as well? Why is there maybe something else that needs to come in there?
Well, you always have to have the calculations. And like HR, we have our own Power BI that has information from HR. And then you have, a lot of inventory calculated data that is helping with the decisions. And then getting all of the data accessible into Power BI as well is really valuable at a higher level. So it's really about, the data that it pulls from, and then what is it that you want to display? Days in stock, moving average, inventory turnover, all those things. What are my risk of stockouts? How many are they? How are they trending? You want to see if you are making good decisions, and then you want to see if you are going in the right direction after you make the decision, so you can sort of steer the boat in the right direction, because you're always going to make decisions based on the information available today, and then business will change. So you're always going to have to sort of, find the way.
So, Elva, you've mentioned now in our discussion master data and calculated data. For our viewers, can you break down the difference between those two types of data?
Yeah, so data input, I mean, it's always just, all the item master, the vendor master, and you want to make sure you have the open closed, or like, that's a big payoff if you have up-to-date assortment. You're gonna want to have input on the link between the item and vendor, who is the preferred supplier, the lead times, the order multiples, pallet quantity, those are inputs. And then you also input transactional data. But we calculate from the transactional data. So we can tell you how your sales have been developing and calculate from that a forecast. In AGR, we take and, translate all your stock history and make a pretty graph to show you, graphically how it has been developing and where you had stockouts. So it's visually in front of you. And then we also have reporting calculated fields that count them. So you can so easily surface what is my highest stockout item or my highest overstocked item, which is always overstocked, or which one is always understocked, to help you, navigate through the thousands of items so you can just focus your time on what needs to be managed.
Yeah. But the calculated data, sometimes it's something you have to do like manually or like book the invoices or
everything has a manual process around it.
Yeah, so you need to have that up to date, and like the in the groceries, you have to like take the stuff that is just out of date or
the expired.
Yeah,
it requires labor, or it's like a job to be done to make sure the transactional data is.
And you can't do that just once a month or something. You need to have that up to date so the system works.
Yeah, so no matter like how cutting edge the system is and how much everybody loves to talk about AI, we still need to make sure that the data going into the system is up to date, is correct, in order to get the most out of it, so that we can then go and make the best decisions based on that.
Yeah, and you might want to, or it's a really good idea to also enrich the calculations, for example, with telling the forecast system that certain dates are events. And they're recurring, they're not at the same dates or the same week of the year, but it is this kind of event, and we are expecting this event in week 20 in the upcoming year, to enrich the calculations. So it's both like sales transactions, and they have to be booked on time, and then you can enrich the calculations by adding that human factor, which is not in the ERP. ERP is not telling you that was an event, actually.
And Hanna, you have an interesting story, I think, where you were talking about promotions, and before you had a sort of single source of truth or AGR, the marketing department would like set up promotions, but then what would happen as far as like the supply chain? Do you remember this story?
Yeah, like we had like promotions, and we got new items for this promotion, and it was sent to the stores and were supposed to be on display, but they didn't actually know they were supposed to be on display. So it needs to be like communication.
And it's also political, because like, you want to have everybody involved. They don't want to get like something was sent in and they didn't know about it. And, so they should expect it. They should be, waiting to get it in, know what it's about.
Be prepared. So.
And you want to get the goods in early, so you do have time.
To set it up before it's promoted.
Right. It needs to look good in the store. Pleasing to the eye. There's that whole side of it as well. You can't just throw it out.
And remember, you sort of, manipulated the promotion time in the system to make sure, because you had really short lead times. So you sort of bought it in, before you needed it. On purpose. So either you would put the promotional dates earlier for the system to, pick up on it, or you would buy it sooner and then just cover until, cover a longer period.
All right, we only have a few minutes left in our time. And I want to sort of end on a high note for our viewers. So hopefully everybody who's been watching us online, you've gotten inspired to take on a data cleaning or a data task. And what I want to ask our experts is if people are, good to go and they really want to get started, we want to keep this momentum going, where would you have them start this week, today, as soon as possible?
The spring cleaning of the items, just close items that need to be closed.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good place to start. And you see, like, you accomplish something if you take out the list in Excel and it's like 10,000 lines or something, and you close off 4,000, and you're like, yes, I did something
Really
today.
good.
Yeah. It is nice. Like,
really good job.
Front load your checklist with things you've already done, so you feel good about yourself.
And I remember the story about the bankrupt supplier. Everybody knew he was bankrupt.
But the system didn't know.
No. Just take that time, take what you already know, and take that to close those vendors. And sometimes people will have hashtags or a comma or a separator to indicate, phasing out or even closed items or special order items.
Mm-hmm.
Take those hashtags and mark them as special order items. Do that this week.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not sure where to start, we had a rule in the production plan to say what vendors will go over to SAP, and that was just if there's not a single purchase order or placed for that supplier in the last 3 or 5 years, then they're out. And if they don't have an active item that hasn't been, had a transaction in the last 3 years, then it's easy decision. So find a way to make the decision easy and start cleaning.
Mm-hmm. So we've got start with your assortment, start with your items, get those closed. And we've got take the stuff that's in your head or you've marked in the system in some way and mark it in a way the system can understand, right? So that it's not just some special character, but everybody can come in and be like, okay, if I want to pull all closed items, I can do it easily, or all the open items.
Fields, not
use the fields. Just check that box. Click the box. Or perhaps look at your vendors. Take a look at the ones that are still functioning, not bankrupt anymore, or are still supplying, and you can clean up on that side. Or as we mentioned before, just take a look at what your goals are. If the first step is just getting a handle on your data and where it's housed, doing that kind of analysis can be well worth it before you dive in. Now, maybe you're already, as a viewer, and you've been in this in a long time, you kind of have a handle on that already, but we don't want to assume that everybody's coming in at the same starting point. You might just want to sit down and make some goals.
And if you're at the very, bare minimum, just got a system that can work for you, then lead times and order multiples. Then you're going to order on time,
the right amount,
and then the purchase order lines are also going to be in the quantity that the supplier actually supplies the goods in. That will save you a lot of time.
Well, we're wrapping up now, and I really want to thank you both for being with us today. It was really lovely talking with you, and I really enjoyed getting to know more about supply chain and your experience just leading up to this. And I hope our viewers feel the same, that you've come away with something useful and actionable. I just want to remind everybody who participated or who came today, before the end of the week, you will get a series of 4 checklists that may help you get started in the data cleanup and management projects that you have hanging over you, that take a look at both types, or actually 3 things, not both, types of data, how to clean it up, and if you're looking at integrating or going over to a new ERP or bringing on a software like AGR, that can help you get started with that as well. So look out for that in your email, and if you don't get them, don't hesitate to reach out and remind us, because that's really something we want to share. So have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week, and I hope that you will join us on the next Chain Reactions as well.